was waiting for you. Oh, there we go. Now we're live.
Great.
Shaun,
Do
you're
it.
live. You're on. You're on the show, man.
Been looking forward to this.
I know you were you were the first person I thought of, but obviously because we're longtime friends, you could be like the first guest on the show.
I know. Makes sense. Just keep me for later on once you have actually successfully done this a few times.
Yeah, exactly. I guess with that, welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Weekly Knowledge Nuggets. We actually should have some updates in the next couple of weeks around evolving our branding if you care about that sort of stuff. But without further ado, very excited to introduce Shaun from BetterCloud. And I'll let him introduce himself more thoroughly, but Shaun and I worked together at BetterCloud for a long period of time. We're good friends, and among other things, he always teaches me a lot about data. So Shaun, anyways, tell our audience who you are, and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. Been following it, really cool stuff, really interesting conversations. My name is Shaun. I have been at BetterCloud for 7 years. Prior to that, I was at a fintech firm doing analytics for hedge funds and institutional investors. And prior to that, I was at Northwestern getting a degree in mathematical methods in the social sciences, which is the fancy way of saying applied math. And I did some economics and minored in history as well. So kind of all over the place. But that has led me eventually to a path of data, which wasn't always so clear. Initially was doing fintech and kind of cutting my teeth as a technical CSM. Decided I didn't love that as much, wanted to kind of move to a career in data, taught myself SQL, taught myself Python, became dangerous in that, and then ultimately found a job at BetterCloud. And fun fact, Nick interviewed me for this job at BetterCloud that I got 7 years ago. And I think one of my favorite stories is that he didn't know that I got
I was going to try to tell the story, but now you're telling the story. So you got to tell the story.
Well, Nick and I had a wonderful interview, and I got the gig, and I walked into the office on my first day, and Nick, who clearly hadn't been alerted that I had been offered and accepted, asked me if I was there for more interviews. And I was like, no, Nick, I actually got the job. And he was pumped, but it was a very funny way to start my BetterCloud career. But here we are, a little more than 7 years later. I've gone from being a business intelligence engineer, and now I am a VP of data and business systems. So it's been an amazing journey, and I've learned a ton along the way.
Totally. Well, I mean, that story is just one of the all-time classics. And when you were talking, I was reminded that you're self-taught as a data person, right? Which honestly, from now having talked to so many data professionals, that's not that uncommon a story, actually. Like, I mean, how many people go and they're like, oh, I want my 4-year degree to be in data, you know? I mean, maybe there's more of that now, but I don't think 10 years ago that was really a thing.
Yeah, I think, what you see a lot is these data analysis boot camps or graduate degree programs, because there aren't 4-year tracks in undergrad to get to that level of detail. We probably could have a full session of just talking about how undergrad doesn't necessarily prepare you for the real world in a lot of ways. And I think this is a very prime example of that, is that careers in data and analytics, they want you to get that foundational learning in whatever liberal arts college, whatever that is, and then go into graduate school or something after that. So not as many paths early on in your career to get to a data analyst role.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you saw my teaser earlier today on LinkedIn about Shaun, as you're probably quickly figuring out, he's very opinionated, which is part of his charm. So you just got some of his opinions there. But this is why I think this session is going to be awesome. And we'll try to keep the opinions to things that are somewhat in bounds, because the two of us can spiral off on a lot of different stuff, including non-conventional, or why college doesn't prepare us for the real world, which I would generally agree with you. I was a history and literature major in undergrad, and I mean, I run a tech company today, right? But folks who have tuned in, we're now 5 minutes in. They're like, "Come on, Nick! Like you teased this session about data and scaling with data. So let's dive a little bit more into the topic. For me, one of the really interesting things about your journey, beyond some of the IC stuff that you're talking about, to VP at the same company, which isn't the most common story in the world, is that you kind of led data at BetterCloud from the very beginning, even if you were that IC, all the way to now, where it's really a much more scale company. So like, take us back to those early days when you joined BetterCloud. Like, what stage was the company was at, and like, why do you think it was at that time that the data team got started?
Yeah, happy to dig into this. This is like a great topic. I think it's really interesting. So, when I was looking for a job, they had a rec open for business intelligence engineer, and the company was around 100 people, and they had like a director of BI who was sitting in the finance org, which is, I think, interesting in and of itself. And he was looking for his first hire. And funny enough, he's still my manager, Joe Antosca. He's now the COO of BetterCloud. So it's been a great journey for both of us. But he was looking for someone to help kind of build this database, this centralized database, which would serve as a foundation. And they wanted to initially start with sales analytics. I hit it off with them, and I interviewed with Nick, who was doing biz ops. I interviewed with our CFO. I interviewed with Joe. I interviewed with a couple other people. And ultimately, they were looking for someone to kind of prove out the value of a data team. It was so early in the company, and what was unique was that a lot of other companies that size were not investing in a IC, business intelligence engineer, to kind of think about what data looks like. And I still remember to this day, like, I got the offer the same day. I was pretty close to the end of the search, so I got lucky. I was able to kind of fit in there. And then I got an email from our CEO, David Politis, over the weekend. And he just basically told me his vision for data and why he thought it was so important in the journey of BetterCloud, and why this next phase of BetterCloud's growth was going to be reliant on data. And I thought, I read that email and I was like, wow, the buy-in I'm seeing from CEO, the CFO, leadership there in investing in data was something I hadn't seen in some of the other places I interviewed, and immediately like confirmed to me this was the right place to go. And I think that's my biggest thing here, is that buy-in from the leadership. When I talk to people about how do you build a data culture, it's actually a top-down approach. People may argue like, oh no, bottoms up, everyone needs to be thinking about data from like the ground level, but like, no, everyone has their own opinions about how data should be used, where it should come from. It's incumbent upon executive leadership team, like especially CEO, in my opinion, to be pushing down that vision of, we're going to be a data-driven company. I have a very specific memory of us going and meeting with our CEO and the marketing team. And the marketing team had done their own analysis of some of that they had done, and the data had done some analysis. And our CEO was like, no, like, we need to have one source of truth. We can't have different teams kind of like competing for which data source is the right one. The data team is going to own this moving forward, and the marketing team needs to work with the data team in order to agree that the data is right. So those sort of, just backing up the data team's validity across the company and making sure that everyone understood that. And then you start to see the wins kind of pile up of getting that buy-in, building out dashboards, having people use those dashboards. Then it becomes like that hamster wheel where you're actually delivering tons and tons of value to the business.
Totally. I mean, I was there. I remember that level of buy-in. I can't remember though, like, data teams, and you hear these types of themes a lot, right? Like, get those early wins. You got to get that buy-in from that C-level, that executive level champion, be it the CEO, CFO, etc. Often that's like, get a win with a specific function. Was there like a first function that you got a win with? I mean, obviously you had David's buy-in, but do you remember that?
Yeah, I do, because it was still early in like the data kind of industry, like not industry, but just people were pretty early to BI and stuff like that. And I remember we had our database in Azure SQL Server, and we used this tool called Relational Junction to replicate Salesforce data into Azure SQL Server. And basically, our first mandate was, can we build really good sales analytics to help BetterCloud close more deals and give us more metrics on, ISR, individual sales reps, BDRs, business development representatives, like how many calls are they doing? How many connections are they making? What time of day is the best time to call prospects and do these cold calls? Like how are people trending towards their quotas, individual and at a team? These are all metrics that are like table stakes for most companies, but like you have to do the work in order to like map and get the data in Salesforce and start to collect it in a way that makes sense. So that required a lot of cross-functional work across the business systems team that was there, who owned Salesforce, across sales leadership, to really hone into like what metrics they're interested in doing. And obviously that took a couple of iterations before we got to the right one. But building that first proof of concept with sales analytics was really the impetus for all that came after. And then we quickly established, okay, this is working. People are getting tons of value. Sales leadership is getting tons of values from these reports and dashboards that we're starting to build. Can we do that for Success? Success has 5, 7, 9 applications that they're going into to prep for individual customer calls. They're going to Pendo to get usage data. I think back then it was like Evergate. They're going to Salesforce to see commercial data and maybe like any support tickets. I think that was actually Zendesk. Like so many different systems just to build one cohesive picture of what the customers were doing. And we're like, can we build that all in a single pane of glass that allows the CSMs to spend as little time as possible prepping and actually doing value added work for the business? And that's how like our next big release was the Cockpit came to fruition. And I think that's still to this day, that's 6 years ago, still to this day, one of the things that is our most used dashboard.
Oh yeah, I know, because that's one of the things that anyways gets rolled out as part of our product as a
exactly.
But that's a completely different thing. Anyways, I remember. I also remember that Cockpit when you all developed it, and just how it revolutionized the way the CSMs engage with customers, right? But yeah, I mean, what's interesting about that, as I'm hearing you play it back, was how critical that was to kind of the kind of key success criteria or success points or things that the company was working on existentially at that time. And if we rewind 7 years, it was like kind of in the beginning of the transitions, the new platform. There's just so many changes around how we were taking it to market, how we were selling it. And those were very existential moments for the business. And so it makes sense that data would have been applied there kind of first, right? Because that was what everyone was obsessed with, including the CFO, the CEO, honestly, the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a mistake I see companies doing nowadays is investing in data much later than I would expect, because the return on investment on a data team is not instantaneous. It requires tender love and care to build out pipelining in a way that scales. And really the secret sauce is, yes, you use a tool, and we haven't talked about it, but like we were very early adopters of Fivetran. Like I have a customer story on Fivetran from like 4 years ago when we were doing it. Like they were basically early stages, and we, I think it's early 2017, became customers of Fivetran. And they were like, I was writing scripts, Python scripts, to get data out of systems. I remember like I had a Zendesk script to get our support data out because I wanted to create like Slack bots that end of the week told individual support reps what they were doing, tell the managers what their team was doing. All of that got abstracted away once we got Fivetran, was able to use ELT, extract, load, transform, to get all of that data into our database. But yeah, I think those sort of things really change the game, and it makes it just easier. And like you need to do all of those steps, and then start to have the data flow in and save it temporally so you can see what the business looked like historically on certain days. And then you're like, okay, let me get the product data. into the database. And I think that's the game changer that people see when they have and start to build a data team is like, yes, you can get all the application data that you use internally or externally that's customer facing and get that metadata, but getting pipeline to your own product's back end to get that data flowing into the database and then combining the commercial data from Salesforce with product usage data and temporally saving that and then having that at the tips of your fingers. I mean, we're at a point now where when there are blockers or bugs in the platform, the tech team is coming to us to be like, hey, like, do you have this in BigQuery that we can, search and kind of see what the extent and kind of scope of this bug is, because we built it in a way that we're replicating tons of product tables directly in BigQuery.
That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, I think just in general, your advice of getting started early with data is an apt one. And you hear so many horror stories from data leaders who join later stage companies that have gotten further along. And they have this mandate that's put upon them of, like transform our business with data or whatever you want to say. And it just becomes a complete mess. And I think interesting, like one of the things as you talk and I meditate on this is, BetterCloud, like it has become a very successful company, but I see it as this like amazing success story of something that was like created from actually very little. And for folks that aren't like familiar of BetterCloud, like the original product of this company was it was a third-party administration management tool on top of Google Apps or G Suite. And it's kind of crazy to build a business specifically around that. And it has expanded into something much broader than that. But it has become a like truly scaled business that executed private equity and all of this good stuff that you would want out of a high growth company. And interestingly, as I talked that out, the fact that it was such a struggle, or there was such hand-to-hand combat for so long, meant that we had to be on top of data, right? That data had to be at the center of it.
Differentiator.
It was a differentiator, exactly, as opposed to an afterthought because all these other things was going wrong. So I don't know. Like, obviously, that's my opinion on it. You are the data leader, but to me, like data has been the nerve center of decision making at the company for a long period of time, and to me, that's one of the key differentiators.
Yeah, I think it's something we consistently hear is that when we were fundraising multiple times, we'd meet with potential investors and we'd share our data, and they'd be kind of wowed with the comprehensiveness of what we were showing them, the graph that we had on our business, the different cuts of data that we were able to do because everything was so clean and organized in our database. And I think it just like validated all the work that we did and made us think even more critically about what we could do to kind of squeeze more juice out of that lemon.
Totally. So I think maybe to like fast forward a bit, we've already been teasing it some kind of at later stage. And again, kind of the topic here is kind of supposed to be about like the evolution of data at the company as the company grew and scaled. So it was like 100 folks at the company, and the number when you joined, the number had to have been north of 3x that at one point, and it's bubbled around a bit. I know, but like massively larger company today. How would you describe or kind of posit the evolving role of data over the last 7 years? Maybe like from those initial wins to now, right? Like, has that fundamentally changed in your mind?
Yes. Short answer is it's evolved tremendously. I think 7 years ago, I was, metaphorically fighting for my life, to prove that data was actually a useful investment for the business, and just proving out any single win that I could by building out dashboards and metrics and things like that. And then it's grown, we talked about sales, we talked about success, but then just keep like evolving that across the business. What other verticals can we get our hands on to help with the decision making? And it's taken time, it's taken time to get support, to get marketing, to get, rest of go-to-market functions. And then we're moving to now product and engineering and these areas of the business. It takes a while to build the right relationships to know, what they're thinking about and how we can be of help. And then also to get the data. We have a lot of the data, but there's also net new data that we needed to get in order to like actually answer the questions that they wanted to. So, that it's kind of grown naturally. I was an engineer. I was coding every single day. I was living in my Python IDE. Then I hired, another analytics engineer to report to me. And it's again, like you look at these paths for data analysts and they're totally non-conventional. Like, it's not easy to get, like the ecosystem within the data community is small. So like my first hire was a technologist at Goldman Sachs, and she came in and she absolutely crushed it. She was like super adept at coding. She understood business problems. And like, those were the people that really I was looking for, people that could understand why we were doing it for the business and layer in the context, but also do the technical work and kind of marry those two. And I thought that's what made me as an IC very, very capable and very useful to the business. And we found that, and she was great. She was so great. She was poached by Google a year later, but she was continuing to then build more and more processes, more and more data capture. And then I was building a lot of the dashboards at that point. So she was doing all the technical work, getting the data, cleaning the data, storing it. I was building dashboards that was customer facing. And when I say customers, like, and I'm sure a lot of data leaders think of it, my customers are mostly my internal stakeholders, right? My customers are the business. We're internal consultants, right? And then from there, like, you just see so much value being derived. It's like, okay, how can we go even faster? Going even faster for us meant hiring an analyst engineer once my previous one went to Google. And then, okay, I am now trying to be more strategic. So we need to hire a data analyst who's going to manage our project queue, and really own the data viz Tableau dashboard part of it. So then we have both sides of the house. We have the technical pipelining, the infrastructure, someone who's working with DevOps and trying to make sure our pipelines are clean and up to date. And then someone servicing our customers, and building those dashboards. So now you have like a full functioning team. And we've added one more analytics engineer. So basically we have 2 engineers and 1 data analyst. And recently what we've been doing is pushing the envelope on what can we as a data team, we have all this data, what can we build that supplements the product? Like my big goal was, and someone told me this and it really resonated with me, was how do you add revenue to the data team? How do you touch revenue very specifically? And I think that's when you become irreplaceable. And the way that we did that was we did this special project that had the CEO's blessing. It was something we workshop with our CEO. We have, actually had one today. We have the monthly or bi-monthly meetings with our CEO and the data team where we're just showing him what we've been doing. And like a lot of it is this tactical stuff that doesn't really fit in any bucket, but it touches the whole company's like initiatives. But we built this thing called a SaaS benchmarking report about a year and a half ago. And it is an automated canned report. We basically took a Google Slides template, and the engineer on my team was able to basically use the Google Slides API to create like string formatting and then run a script to hit our database to get a single customer's data for everything we wanted, and then drop those specific data points into areas in the Google Slides template. And that's ready to go report that has like everything that they're doing. So like it's ROI. So like our CSMs are using using it a lot in their EBRs, in their on-site meetings. And it's been amazing. We have that the way that like you log into this internal website for data and you just generate it on the fly. And so this is self-service automated reporting, takes minutes to load. It's critical now to the business. And we have it on the website as one of our products. Like this is like as explicit as you can get into touching revenue. And it's just scratching the surface. Like we had a PM on the product team helping to build this with us. We had like resources if we needed it from UX design or product design and stuff like that. This was a true product. We treated it as a product, data as a product. It was amazing. And now it's like, no one could imagine doing their job without it. So that's just scratching the surface though. Like what else can we do? What else can we do with the data that, maybe it's taking some time to build into the product, but at least we can build stuff, get it in front of customers, get their opinions on stuff, and see what's actually resonating, and then bring that back to product design to bake into the roadmap.
Yes, super cool. And obviously, just transformative stuff for the business in general. Normally when you ask a data leader, or often when you ask a data leader a question like that, you'll hear something like, "Oh, well, now we touch every function in the business," which you said, right? Or you hear a lot of like, "Oh, well, we've now invested and made analytics self-service. So now anyone can like self-serve themselves data." I know you have an opinion about that, but as opposed to some of that stuff, I mean, you're kind of going all the way to how do we actually not just like live the ethos of data as a product, but like how can we make data our product, even if it's unconventional in some ways, and making data revenue generating and customer facing. And there's nothing that's like more impactful to a business than that.
I mean, you're a CEO. If your data team came to you and was like, "We've built something that literally impacts revenue that your customers generate for you," you'd be like, "Okay, tell me more. How do I make this go faster? And how do I get more out of this?" Right?
Of
like
course.
That's like that. You're speaking the language of the leaders that are kind of investing in you to do your job, and like that's the best way to do it, in my opinion.
Of course. I mean, look, I'm a early stage founder and CEO, so I wish I had a Shaun who ran data for me, but maybe at some point we'll have someone like you in the future. But all kidding aside, everyone's talking about the macro economy, what's happening in the market, and all of that good stuff. And so everyone is thinking about, well, how do I grow my business? And then, or how do I protect the business that I have? And I think in general, the message of, well, like, how do you help your customers grow their business, right? Is one of the best ways to protect yourself or to show value, right? And to tie, well, the investment I'm going to make in you to the value, to value, right?
Yeah.
I'll invest in you if you can help me grow my business. Now, I'm talking much more conventionally from like me trying to sell the Shauns of the world my product, right? Like if I can prove to you that what I can offer you is going to help you grow your business or operate it more effectively, you're going to be a lot more interested in it for whatever reason, right? And you're kind of turning that on its head and actually you're saying the exact same thing. Your customers in this case are just the CEO of the company that you work for or the other leaders that you work for. And your product is the business platform, right? But it's the exact same analogy.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that.
So you were just talking about that. Are there other, I don't know, before transition, any other high impact projects, things that you and the team are thinking about right now before I get you to give us some of your hot takes about trends in technology and broader life?
I think that's really it. I mean, one thing that I really like is trying to build health scores in certain ways, and there's a lot of different ways you can think about that. We built in a customer health score that is just basically all data driven and tells a CFM if the customer is green, yellow, red. We use that for our AOP, our annual operating plan, and a lot of ways to just predict out renewals. And I think that's something that fits squarely within the data team's purview. We did that about 2 years ago now, so we're at like V3, and we're always looking to improve it. But also interesting, like you don't want to try and iterate too much because then you can't actually see the trends. So you have to like only update it. We're doing it every other quarter right now if there needs to be, because you don't want to over index on things that you're seeing with your customer base. We're thinking about an employee risk score internally to see like can we measure employee sentiment, not sentiment, but like propensity to churn, so that managers can get some sort of heads up and try and save employees that might be at risk of churning, especially if they're high performing. We're looking into that, but that's that's going to be a challenge because of the data around HR systems is not super easy to parse. But those are some of the cool stuff that we're working on. We're really trying to be creative, but also, that creativity is only available when you're doing a great job and your day-to-day contributions to the business are super stable. So that means that our Tableau dashboards are working and updating correctly, that all the data that other people access through BigQuery, through reports, ad hoc G Sheets are able and accessible and things like that. So I think you gain the ability to do these creative, fun science projects once you build out a foundation that is just self-repeating in ways that is like you need a lot of bandwidth to maintain it day to day.
Totally. And again, this show is not ever intended as like a plug for our product, but part of what I hope our product helps you guys do is handle some of that work and those workflows around enabling the business, right? So that you can focus on the science projects and those things that are kind of at top of the pyramid for you and kind of the cutting edge work. So I think with all of that and kind of some of your lessons or teachings rather about where you've come from, I want to transition a little bit to just some of your like broader opinions, because these are always fun to get Shaun's broader opinions about things. So AI, machine learning, lots of folks talking about it today. In general, but there's lots of chatter right now about like the promise of this technology for data teams, things like predictive analytics, natural language processing. I saw just like a poll on LinkedIn recently that said like 50% of data practitioners are planning to like play with natural language processing in the near future. What do you think about these trends? Like, where do you think there's promise there, and what do you see coming in the future?
Yeah, great question. Obviously, very timely. I think that AI and ML is a new frontier. It's super exciting, and I think we're seeing a lot of use cases for it. We're finally starting to see a lot of use cases for it, like within the last 4 to 5 months. I think over my 7 years at BetterCloud, I've felt that it's just been buzzwords a lot that weren't actual use cases internally at companies. I think that the Facebooks and the Googles of the world, they have real AI ML use cases because of the quantity of data that they're ingesting on a minute by minute, day by day basis. I think most companies are not at that level of data in terms of quantity. And I think people underestimate how much data you need to actually build a viable model and tinker with the parameters to make it usable. So I think it's kind of like AI ML it was kind of like a chapter in the last 5-6 years, however, like blockchain when that was all happening, and people were just adding it to their company like earnings reports to like get a pop in their stock price, but like there wasn't actually meat on the bones. I think that's changed dramatically with the introduction of ChatGPT. I think December was a big turning point. I've read a lot about this. GitHub Copilot before that was something that was gaining a lot of momentum. And I listened to an interview recently, and the CEO of GitHub was like, yeah, like we thought once GitHub Copilot came out, like there'd be tons of use cases for like GPT-3 and stuff like that, but there wasn't. And ChatGPT kind of was the impetus and like the kickstart for all of that. And for me as well, I don't think I realized how powerful AI ML could be until I saw some of this generative AI stuff. And that definitely changed my thought processes around what's possible in the near future. It always felt a lot further out than it actually was. But yeah, I think I had that like, oh wow, like this is crazy. Like I equated to like my first time on the internet. Like I remember dial-up, and then I remember your first broadband experience where like you didn't hear the tones of a dial-up, and instead you were just connected to the internet, and it was like faster than it's ever been before. Like
Yeah, I mean,
That was like
not to go completely inappropriate, but like dial up to broadband is like the equivalent of like your first sexual experience, like in retrospect. You could say the same thing about ChatGPT.
exactly. And like, I mean, I don't know if people who listen to this like read Ben Thompson's Stratechery. He talked about his experience with Sydney, like that 1 week period that Microsoft had like no like thresholds or criteria for how you could interact with ChatGPT, and it was like the wild west, and it took on a personality and like hated humans or something like that. Like, and then said it was like the most remarkable experience he's ever had on the internet, and I think that's what we're unlocking now. But if you play this out, and I was actually talking to David, our CEO, today about this, like, first of all, there's huge privacy concerns. Anything that you put into ChatGPT is being used to train GPT-4 now. And so you see Italy, and now it has banned it because of GDPR concerns. You see Canada opening up cases around it. You see like private PII data that people are feeding into ChatGPT unknowingly, and that's like causing like leaks, security leaks or breaches and stuff like that. So first of all, there's a lot of concerns on that. So you can't really use the free versions to like improve your business at all without having huge privacy concerns. The next thing is that how expensive it is to actually do this generative AI. OpenAI can abstract all the costs. They're just using it as a lead gen tool. Microsoft is investing billions of dollars into this so that they can use it also across all their functionality. And then when you want to use it, instead of paying per query to OpenAI, you just use it in Microsoft because it's already baked in, right? And then forget what company is doing this, but they just release new tiers of pricing, because if you want to use AI, they have to pay for the compute costs. They got to pay for all the models and stuff they're doing. It can be very expensive very quickly. So I don't know how these smaller companies, like these VC-backed companies, are going to justify, unless it like transforms the way their customers use their product. It's going to be it has to be an extremely compelling case for them to bake that into their product and actually have users leveraging generative AI. I'm not sure how that's going to look like.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, I think what happens with costs, we'll clearly find out, right? I mean, that's a problem for the software vendors. It's probably the biggest problem for folks like Microsoft and Google as anything, I think. And the privacy stuff are all concerns. I think like any compelling technology, to me, it's what are the like actual use cases and like the things that they can unlock. I think you hit on a couple of those, at least with regards to like what the value could be to data teams. The GitHub Copilot type of functionality is really, really interesting. I don't know if your team has played with that internally at all for like actual engineering work, but
we use PyCharm, and we don't have. We're a G Suite shop. Like everything's in GCP, so we don't really have a ton of Microsoft exposure. There was a partnership announced with Google with Replit, which is an IDE. So basically, like that would be Google's GitHub acquisition, but Simon acquisition is a partnership. They haven't gone all the way. So that would be like Google's attempt to do that, and maybe Replit becomes something like table stakes for how GCP companies do that, and then they bake in Bard as a co-pilot to Replit. That could be something that we see down the road. Like, I don't know, you see that Google's playing catch up a lot here, and it'll be. I'll be interested to see if the AI capabilities of Microsoft are so much more advanced than Google that companies start to migrate away from Google to Microsoft specifically for that reason. That's when like we've entered a new age, in my opinion, when people are changing from Google to Microsoft, which is a very non-trivial at all to do that migration for the AI capabilities.
Yeah. I mean, let's hope that doesn't happen for other reasons. Super interesting. So it sounds like maybe play in the future with some of the like autocomplete, like true generative content, like creation capabilities through something like that. Are there any other like use cases for your team or for data teams that you could think of? I don't know, maybe in some more of the like bottom of the pyramid, less interesting workflows?
I think, you could probably prompt it to write code, like maybe some functions that are annoying to write as an individual coder that you could prompt it to, and I haven't done that actually, or no one on my team has, but definitely thinking about it, because I've seen some examples, especially on Twitter. There was someone who built like an iOS Swift app with like a very detailed 10-step prompt of how they wanted like a calendar weather app, or just a calendar app. So I think there are things that you can do in streamlining, like, again, this is the Copilot example a little bit, right? Like having it auto-generate code and things like that. I haven't seen anything super compelling around like other things in the workflow. And that's why I'm like not so convinced that it's just completely remove people out of the workforce. I think there's a lot of hand holding that needs to happen, and specifically the prompt engineering, I think is more art than science. Like, how do you get ChatGPT to give you the right thing? It's rarely going to be on the first try. It's going to be a lot of tinkering and things like that. So I think that's a drawback, not necessarily a drawback, of just, friction in using it. So I'm not trying to force my team to use ChatGPT, but like it is something that I'm thinking about and constantly learning new use cases and seeing if we can apply anything. But yeah, I think the roadblocks around cost and privacy are really concerning, and that's kind of preventing me from actually going full speed and trying to see, like, can we whip up some cool stuff data wise that's like, how many companies want some sort of ChatGPT interface for their customers so that they can just streamline a lot of the things that they have to do within the product. That would obviously be ideal, but I think the actual result of that requires more advancement across generative AI.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, part of what we're thinking about, within our product and a lot of our surface area, as you know, are these kind of support enablement workflows,
Definitely.
right? For like your users, right? So stuff around that is, like tier one, but for like data, like the tier one data stuff, right? That's not a great use of your team's time. And we can help there today. But those are the types of workflows that are like perfect for an AI, like a generative AI use case. But I think to your point, the promise is there, but then how can you actually live up to it, right? And you need models to train to do that. There's content to train them on. That content is unique organization to organization. How every organization uses data is slightly different. And so there's like the promise of this, but then like, how do you go from point A to point Z, right? And I think that's a lot of the struggle or the secret sauce. I think that a lot of these kind of AI and machine learning kind of applications or technologies have in general. But with that, as always, now we're running over time. Shaun, thanks so much for joining. This has been so much fun to have you finally on the show. Before we go, anything else you want to leave? Any words of wisdom you want to leave anyone who's watching with?
I think just if you're looking for a career in data, I think just keep pushing and just get your foot in the door somewhere where you can deliver value. I definitely was struggling trying to make that career pivot from like a technical CSM to a data analyst. I would get to the end of interviews, like very like final rounds, and they'd be like, "We really like you, but we were going with someone with more experience." And it was a catch-22 because I didn't have any experience because it was my first time being a data analyst. And then I got my chance at BetterCloud, and I took it. And it's 7 years later, like here I am. So I think don't get discouraged. It's not the easiest to break into this industry, but once you do get that opportunity, take it, make sure that you're impacting the business in a positive way. And, leverage communities. There's tons of communities out there for data, particularly locally optimistic, and other places that you can go to get feedback about how you're trending with your data career.
Awesome. Well, you heard it from Shaun. Keep pushing. Don't take no for an answer. And it takes time, but you can get there. And yeah, man, as always, learned a lot from you today, and I'll talk with you soon.
Thank you, Nick. It was a great time being on here.
Likewise. See you, buddy.
See ya.